CorelDRAW tips and tricks. Today's session, working with rulers with Steve Spence. Brought to you by Conde Systems. In this session, we'll talk about using rulers in CorelDRAW. Now, lest this sound somewhat condescending, let me assure you there are many tips and tricks about rulers in CorelDRAW that, if you know them, will save you a lot of time and frustration. So, let's get started. You are probably aware that when you open CorelDRAW, there are rulers at both the top and the left-hand side. These are standard rulers and are defaulted in CorelDRAW. They are changeable, however. If you look at this box, you'll see that there is a drop-down menu that allows you to change from inches to millimeters, picas and points, pixels, ciceros, and dittos. These are interesting. Cicero is approximately the same thing as a pica typeface. It is approximately 12 spaces to the inch. A ditto is the smallest measurement used in measuring fonts, and it is approximately 1/72nd of an inch. It's primarily used for measuring fonts or leading, that is, the space between lines. These are obviously ones you'll probably never use. Feet, yard, miles, centimeters, meters, kilometers. Q and H are really just space holders, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. So all kinds of different spacing that can be used in the ruler, and all you need to do is click on it. Pixels, for instance, comes in handy when a website requires 200 by 200 pixels. You can click on this and you can actually see what size that is, and so you can submit the right size image for a website. If you work with eBay or with Amazon, you'll probably be using this some. So there are a number of different types of rulers, and you can pick and choose which ones you want. If you zoom in on your ruler, oops, wrong button. If you zoom in on your ruler, you can see that it continues to break into smaller and smaller pieces until you can get absolutely ridiculous with it. So your ruler specifications are, for all purposes, infinite. Now there's something else that you need to recognize with rulers. When we're working with a page like this one, which happens to be 8.5 by 11 inches, you'll notice that the 0 point is typically at the bottom left-hand corner. And this is not compatible with most of the things we do. We want it at the top of the corner. And sometimes we might have a box or an object, a photograph, and we want to measure it, and we don't really want to move it to a corner of the page. We just want to measure it. And here's how to do that. If we take the cursor up to the upper left-hand corner between the numbers, click and drag, you'll see a pair of guidelines come down, and you can position those anywhere you want on the page. And when you release your button, you'll find that that becomes the new 0, 0. So this box, the upper left-hand corner, is positioned at 0, 0, and then as you work across or use guidelines, etc., you can easily see that, okay, I want this to be 4 inches. I'll click on it, select the box, select the box, and just bump it out to the guideline. So it's easy to work with them that way, knowing where you are. To make the next segment of this session more understandable, let's do an exercise. I've drawn a box that is approximately 7 by 5.5 inches. And I have inside of it a number of, we'll call them engraving plates. And these need to be lined up. And I want them to be 1/2 inch from the outside edge on each side. Now there are a number of ways to do that, but this is the one I think is the simplest. What we're going to do is first we're going to take our ruler and put 0 on top of that upper left-hand corner. Now we're going to go to View, Snap to, Document Grid. Now what happens now is when we pull a guideline from underneath a ruler, it will automatically snap to the major indentations in our rulers. Now we're going to go back to View and Snap to, and we're going to tell it to snap to guidelines. This means that the little plates will automatically, when we bump them, will snap to that guideline. We can do that with our mouse, or we can do it with the arrows on our keyboard. We'll get another guideline. We'll move it in 1/2 inch. It's snapped to the ruler, and now we just snap it to the guideline. If you want to snap something and you don't want it to move vertically, hold down the Shift key. Now you can move it, but it will only move horizontally. You have to release the Shift key and start over with each object that you're going to move. And sometimes it's not as cooperative as you might think it ought to be, and takes several tries. There we go. Okay, so now we've lined it up on the left, we've lined it up on the right, and they are exactly, perfectly lined up 1/2 inch from the outer edge on the left and the right hand side. You can do this, of course, vertically. You can even do it diagonally if you want to. The next thing that we'll look at that is associated with the rulers is the nudge tool. Now we'll use the same little exercise we used once before, and I'm going to snap off out into space so you can see where the nudge tool actually occurs. The nudge tool is this box right here, and you can see that I have it set for 0.01 inches. Now I can set that for anything I want. The typical default for CorelDRAW is 1/10 of an inch. And here's what it does. Let's look at this engraving plate. If I select that plate and hit the arrow key, I'm going to hit the right arrow key, it will move that plate 1/10 of an inch each time I hit the key. Now for most of the things I do, that's way too much. So I'm going to hit off into space again, and I'm going to go back to that nudge tool, set my cursor just in front of the 1, and take it back to 1/100th of an inch. Sometimes I even use 1/1000th of an inch if I'm working on something that's very precise. But for most applications, 0.01 is quite acceptable. Let's select the box, use our left arrow key, and you can see it moving 1/100th of an inch at a time. If I hold the key down, it moves faster. And just to throw you a curve, if I select this one and push down the Shift key and the arrow key, it moves even more. Now here's what's happening. To see what's happening, we're going to have to go a little deeper into CorelDRAW. And so we're going to go to Tools, Options, And if it isn't already selected, we're going to select rulers. Now, on the main page, I changed the nudge tool from 0.1 to 0.01. What you did not know is that I changed the super nudge prior to opening the program to 10 times normal. What this means is if I hold down the shift key and hit one of the arrows, it is going to move the object 10 times what I have set up for the nudge, which is 1/10 of an inch. So I can have both my 0.1 and 0.01 actually available to me at the same time. Now, if you're not confused already, let's go one step further. And here we have the micro nudge. In the micro nudge, we can actually set this as to how tiny we want it to be. And in this case, if I hit the control key and an arrow key, it is going to move 0.005 inches, half of what is shown on this. So we can have 3 nudge tools set up at the same time. These work in both the horizontal and the vertical orientations. I'm going to click OK, and we're going to go back and look at it just one more time. The nudge key, or the nudge formula for this, is 0.01. So if I select this box and move it with the left arrow, I'm moving it 0.01, 1/100th of an inch at a time. On this one, if I press down the shift key and hit the right arrow, it moves a complete 1/10 of an inch, which, as you can see in this case, was too much. If I hold down the control key and hit the left arrow button, now I can move it back, and I'm moving it at 0.005 at each click. So we can use the arrow key, the shift plus arrow, or the micro nudge, which is control plus arrow, and they're always available to us no matter where we are or what we're working with, be it objects, text, anything. And it is in inches because we have it set in inches. If we change our ruler to millimeters, then the nudge also changes. And you can see here it has decided to change it to 0.1 millimeter. We can change that again just by going in and putting a 0 in front of it. But we'll take it back to inches because that's what I generally work with. Okay, in our last little segment here, let's look at units. We said earlier we would come back to this as we click on the box marked units. We have, of course, inches. Most of what we do probably will be in inches, but there are times when I work in millimeters as well. Millimeters, of course, pop up so many different places. Lots of times rulers that you use to measure products with might be broken down in millimeters, or it might just be easier that way. If you obtain a product from overseas, it very likely will be measured in millimeters. And so rather than converting from millimeters to inches, which is always a nuisance, we can just change the ruler to millimeters. After you finish working with millimeters, whatever part of the project that happens to involve, you can go back to inches and it will convert everything for you automatically. Picas and points date back to lithography. A pica is 1/12 of an inch. Same thing is true with points. These are not used as much in the desktop world as they are in the printing world. They're still used there, at least to some degree, but so much of that has gone to desktop publishing that we've gotten away from it. Pixels has to do with the number of pixels, literally, that might be included in a photograph or other object. If we import a photograph into CorelDRAW, it will come in perhaps as a JPEG, but it will actually be measured in pixels. It might be 600 pixels wide, 1200 pixels wide, etc. We often confuse this with DPI, but pixels and DPI are not the same thing. You can, however, always use pixels when you're working